Last week, towards the end of week 5, Blizzard posted these patch notes for December 19th that went live at the start of week 6. And in it were these changes to Holy Priest. All healing increased by 3% and Prayer of Mending healing increased by 15%. My first thought when reading this is these changes won't really do much. They won't change anything. But it got me thinking as to why I think that almost any amount of just numerical tuning isn't really going to change much or do much to help Holy Priests in Mythic Plus. And that's what this video is going to be about. More or less the state of Holy Priest in Dragonflight Season 3, but also it's going to be a little bit of a retrospective, looking back at the kind of arms race that healers have had throughout Seasons 1 and 2, and why my contention for this video is that Holy Priest has been left behind. For whatever reason, Blizzard have made some fantastic changes and iterations upon other healing specializations throughout Dragonflight, but have effectively ignored Holy Priest. So the 3% overall healing increase and the Prayer of Mending buff by 15% is probably a response to this, which is a look at how Holy Priest is going in raid. On any metric you want to look at, they're dead last as far as throughput goes, which is a little sad because Holy Priests are supposed to be a throughput healer, just like Mistweaver, just like Resto Druid, healers that don't have DRs for their raid, like Holy Paladin, Disc Priest, and Resto Shaman. And unfortunately, Holy Priest is just at the bottom of the barrel. So I could be reading a little bit too much into the changes, but regardless, it sparked an idea for this video. So to make my point, I'm going to quickly be going over the broad changes or the impactful changes that were made to a lot of other healing specializations throughout Dragonflight. And I'm not going to be going over each individual numerical change. I'm going to be painting in more broad strokes and looking at the major changes that healers received. First off, we can start with everybody's flavor of the month at the moment, Mistweaver. Mistweaver has received a lot of iteration over Dragonflight, especially in 10.2, but even prior to that, in, let's say, going all the way back to Season 1, 10.0.5, back, which I believe was in January at the start of this year, an entire, effectively, year ago, Shaylin's Gift was added. In previous expansions, Blizzard have been reluctant to make very large changes to, well, talent trees in this case, but to healers in general mid-expansion. In a lot of previous expansions, if a healer kind of sucked or it was lacking in a certain regard early on in an expansion, there was a good chance it was going to stay that way for the rest of the expansion, and then hopefully it gets a look at during the beta or alpha testing phase or whatever of the next expansion. Blizzard threw that model out the window with Dragonflight. I think it's been really good for that to happen. The kind of outlier in that regard was a Holy Paladin being ridiculous after its rework in 10.1.7, but going all the way back to 10.0.5, Blizzard looked at the toolkit that Mistweavers had, particularly in Mythic Plus, and they threw some rather large changes in their direction. So they added Shaylin's Gift, they added Veil of Pride and Xiaohao's Lessons. It went through a couple of iterations with Mastery proccing on each target healed, and then that being removed entirely, and also some numerical buffs and things like that. But suffice it to say that Blizzard looked at Mistweaver's toolkit. They thought that they needed some more powerful, larger cooldown type heals or buttons in their toolkit for Mythic Plus, and they added Shaylin's Gift. They also added the rather large Absorb Shield tacked onto Celestial with Celestial Harmony that added the Chi Cocoon, which then also got buffed later on. They updated the way Feline Stomp works. I believe they shortened its cooldown. They increased its chance to proc a reset with other abilities. They took away the random nature of the Feline Stomp graphic on the ground itself. They added functionality to make it so when you stand in the Feline Stomp, you carry the buff while moving around, so you can reset it or still get the effects of Feline Stomp while not standing in it. They also added Mana Tea back to Mistweavers, I believe in 10.1.5 or maybe it was 10.1.7, along with the Holy Paladin rework. The point I'm trying to make here for Mistweaver, and I guess I'll be doing the same thing for a couple of other healers, is that Blizzard looked at the toolkits that Mistweaver had in Mythic Plus, and they made significant changes, not just numerical buffs or aura tuning. They made whole new talents or brought back old talents into the spec mid-expansion, mid-season. So the Mistweaver that went live at the end of beta or the start of Dragonflight is very different to the Mistweaver that you play now in 10.2. Not just in the numerical tuning, but also the quality of life changes, like Blizzard fixing the instant Vivify buff that used to get eaten if you were casting a Vivify while you gained the buff. The extension of the Ancient Teachings healing up to 40 yards from, I believe it was 15 or 20 prior to that, as well as the Expel Harm buffs. Like, the list goes on. Mistweaver has had a huge amount of power creep throughout the expansion, and the sum of those changes is why Mistweaver is so strong today and why it's so good today. Holy Paladin was the same deal, but to an even larger extent. Blizzard gave the spec a whole rework in 10.1.7. They gave Holy Shock 2 charges, they added Daybreak, they moved Divine Toll to the spec tree, buffed melee wings, added Tears Deliverance, added so many other options for melee Holy Paladin, for casting Holy Paladin, buffs to Judgment, Greater Judgment, Infusion of Light, as well as the rather large change in gameplay, at least for how Holy Paladin plays, melee Holy Paladin in particular, with the range buff of Crusader Strike, Rebuke, and auto attacks. They gave enormous buffs to Holy Prism, I believe, prior to last tier's tier set. They added things like Veneration to the tree and turned Glimmer of Light into a split heal. Blizzard looked at Holy Paladin and how it plays, specifically with keys in mind, and they added to the spec what they felt was missing or what the spec could use, and then they took the numerical tuning from there. It was a similar story again with Resto Shaman. A lot of the power creep or progress that Resto Shaman made in the healing arms race throughout seasons 1 and 2 came from talent readjustments. Some things got moved around the talent tree that helped them out quite a lot, and a couple of talents had their points reduced or just got made baseline with another talent that augmented abilities further. But the large change that came in, I think it was 10.1.5, were the buffs to Primordial Wave and the branch associated with that, and the addition of Tidebringer to the spec tree that used to be a PvP talent, as well as a couple of other smaller talent adjustments to chain heal, effectively took Resto Shaman from a healer that didn't have ways of healing their group or like AoE healing spread targets, and turned it into a healer that could do that quite effectively. I remember in season 1 trying to heal Noku Defensive Tempest boss and a couple of other bosses with a similar damage pattern where your whole party was dying at the same time but they were all spread, and not having buttons like Tidebringer to rely on chain heal being able to bounce around my party meant that if my group wasn't stacked, I literally didn't have a button, a rotational button, to heal my party. I could rely on cooldowns to do it, but I didn't have an AoE heal that worked. And Blizzard looked at the kit that Resto Shamans had and they added functionality to fix those problems, specifically in Mythic Plus. Tidebringer did that, so did the changes to Ancestral Reach and Flow of the Tides. So did a couple of changes to the Primordial Wave talent and branch. And now again in 10.2, or well, last week, Resto Shamans received more changes. They got buffs to Torrent to try and help with their spot healing or like single target healing, buffs to Healing Surge, buff to Healing Stream Totem. Again, it's evident that Blizzard are looking at what the spec has or what they're struggling with in Mythic Plus especially, and they're changing or adding to the spec as they see fit. In 10.1.5, Earthshield also got the 6% DR tacked onto it. And I believe they also got quite a few changes in the top part of the talent tree that gave them more points to spend elsewhere. So instead of Resurgence, and I believe improved Resurgence that was 2 points, it's now just 1 point, and same with a couple of other talents that allowed Resto Shamans to take more on the spec tree. Discipline Priest also went through a huge amount of changes. Disc in Season 1 was nothing like what it was in Season 2, with the Dark Disc that got added and then taken away, but for a while there, at least Blizzard looked at how Disc played, especially in keys, and they went through the talents and they were willing to either just give huge numerical buffs to some talents or just change the way talents work or add new talents entirely. It's been changed again now, but Mind Blast mana cost was reduced and given 2 charges. The whole right side of the tree with all the dark disc talents relating to Mind Blast and Schism and Shadow Covenant and Expiation were all given quite large buffs. And then again in 10.2, Disc got another rework. Blizzard looked at what the spec had, specifically with keys in mind, in my opinion, and went through and made a few active abilities passives to try and alleviate some of the button bloat that the spec had. They changed the functionality of Mind Blast to be able to rely on the power of the dark side procs with a little bit more certainty. Same again with Harsh Discipline was changed the way it works. Same again with Harsh Discipline that was changed to be more reliable. A whole new talent and cooldown was added in Ultimate Penitence. There were buffs made to Power Word Radiance through Enduring Luminescence. Luminous Barrier was buffed. Smite was buffed with the Sanctuary talent in 10.2. Damage Prevention that got introduced. Quite a few talents were streamlined, like Inescapable Torment, and buffed significantly, with functionality changed on also quite a few talents to try and make more of the buttons you press work with more of the talents you take, which worked out quite well with Discipline. Penance now ties into a lot more talents on the spec tree. And through all of this, Discipline gained a lot of power, including the flat 50% buff to Atonement Healing outside of raids. So again, the Discipline that shipped with the launch of Dragonflight is nothing like the Discipline that you play now in 10.2. The spec is so much more powerful now than it was then. And it's the same story with Resto Druid. Resto Druid a little less than the others. The large change that Resto Druids got was the addition of Grove Guardians. But Resto Druid also was the meta healer throughout all of Season 1, along with Preservation Evoker, which is the other healer that didn't receive a whole lot of changes throughout Dragonflight, but I would argue that they are both healers that haven't really needed them. They're both healers that have always done quite well through Seasons 1 and 2 and now 3. The big changes that Resto Druid got were actually numerical buffs, like significant numerical buffs to their damage, Cat Weaving and Boomy Weaving. Lastly, Preservation received a few numerical nerfs along with Resto Druid coming out of Season 1, and then a few numerical changes since then, but largely the Preservation Evoker that shipped at the launch of Dragonflight is fairly similar to the Preservation you play now in 10.2. Things like Lifebind got nerfed quite a little bit. I think Emerald Communion did as well. So has things like Cycle of Life, numerical tuning, but functionally the spec plays very similarly now to what it was like in Season 1. And that isn't too surprising. I think when I was doing my healer videos throughout Dragonflight beta, my consensus coming out of beta and for launch was that Resto Druid and Preservation were the two best designed healers in the game, for Mythic Plus especially. Holy Paladin wasn't that far behind, but overall Resto Druid and Preservation received probably the least amount of larger broad changes throughout Seasons 1 and 2, which makes sense with them being the strongest healers in Season 1. And now sadly onto Holy Priest. Unfortunately, Holy Priest hasn't really been in a good place in Mythic Plus for all of Dragonflight, I would say. They could still be paying the price of their Shadowlands dominance, I'm not quite sure. But the Holy Priest of 10.2 of today is very similar to the Holy Priest of launch, but unfortunately it wasn't strong like Resto Druid or Preservation Evoker were, and it hasn't received the attention that all of the other healing specs have received from Blizzard. It hasn't had the rework that Holy Paladin has, it hasn't had the talent adjustments that Resto Shaman and Discipline Priest have had, or Mistweaver Monk. The dozens and dozens of changes and iterations that each of those specs have received over the past 2 seasons just haven't really been thrown Holy Priest's way. Holy Priest has had some changes to this top part of the tree regarding Imperial Blaze and the way Holy Fire, I believe, splits damage or spreads, cleaves damage, whatever you want to call it. And the spec has had a few numerical nerfs and buffs here and there, not unlike other healers throughout the seasons, but functionally the way the talent system works and the way the spec plays hasn't changed. And that is roughly my problem with Holy Priest, is that playing Holy Priest feels like I'm playing a healer from last expansion or 2 expansions ago. I remember when Rapture for Discipline Priest didn't apply a power word shield when you press Rapture. You just had to press Rapture, which effectively was a dead global with no healing, and then you would press power word shield after that to gain the benefits of Rapture. And I remember that Mistweaver's Celestial was the same. You would press your Celestial and then you would cast your Enveloping Mists or cast your other spells to gain the benefits of your Celestial buffs and your Enveloping Breath and things. But pressing the cooldown itself was a dead global. And then Blizzard did a pass. They went through and they said, okay, this feels bad and this isn't very well designed, so we're going to make it so when you press Rapture, you get the power word shield. And we're going to make it so when you press your Celestial, you get the cocoon that goes on your party, which at the moment is a huge absorb, and a boatload of healing tacked onto the cooldown itself. So that when you press the cooldown, it isn't a dead global. But unfortunately, that treatment hasn't been extended to Holy Priest, who now, well, still press Apotheosis and nothing happens. They reset their holy words, but then they still have to wait until the next global to press a holy word to gain the benefit of the cooldown. For whatever reason, that rationale behind the Discipline Priest and Mistweaver changes wasn't applied to Holy Priest. Holy Priest is similar again to, I would say, what Season 1 Resto Shaman was as well, in that it feels like when I play Holy Priest, unless my group is stacked, I don't have AoE healing, because I really just rely on Holy Word Sanctify to heal my group, or I'm just spamming a single target heal on 5 different people. And that is because Prayer of Healing kind of sucks. It has for a long time. This is a spell that has always been tuned around raid throughput, and it's never really worked in Mythic Plus, but unfortunately, Prayer of Healing hasn't had the same kind of treatment that Chain Heal had, because Chain Heal was quite similar in that it was tuned for a long time, probably even now, is still tuned numerically to be a raid healing spell. And yet, when Blizzard saw that it wasn't working very well, or Resto Shamans were lacking a spread AoE heal in Mythic Plus, Tidebringer got added to the tree, but the same kind of treatment wasn't extended to or thought about for Holy Priest. Circle of Healing is okay, but it's a 15 or 12 second cooldown. It's not enough. The somewhat strange and I guess you would say janky feeling that Mistweaver used to have with things like casting a Vivify while you gain your instant cast Vivify proc, which used to be eaten by finishing the cast of your Vivify. That sort of, you pick a talent and you expect it to work a certain way, but it doesn't work that way, is something that was fixed for Mistweaver, which has been really nice, but hasn't been looked at for Holy Priest. Things like when your Prayer of Mending heals 50 times with 2 points in answered prayers and you gain Apotheosis for 8 seconds, that Apotheosis doesn't reset your holy words. Unfortunately, all of the talents for Holy Priest that were avoided through all of Season 1 and all of Season 2 haven't been looked at by Blizzard to make people, or make Blizzard wonder why people don't play them. Effectively, this whole left side of the bottom part of the talent tree, I haven't seen anyone play this. I've never played this. I think maybe I tested them in beta, but since then they've just been fairly weak and underdeveloped or undercooked talents that don't really do what they're supposed to do. They are supposed to be talents that buff a certain type of playstyle, but they either don't buff it enough to make it warranted, or they buff it in ways that aren't particularly good, so the talents are ignored. The most disappointing part about Holy Priest, or playing Holy Priest in Season 3 in particular, in my opinion, is that if I look at how I played every other healer in Season 1 compared to how I play them now in Season 3, all of them are significantly different. Resto Druid and Preservation Evoker, like I said, are the least different, but they're still better than they were in Season 1. They still have more tools, they still play smoother, they still have toolkits that have been iterated upon and developed throughout the course of the expansion, with healers like Resto Shaman, Mistweaver, Holy Paladin being the exemplars of that. They have come such a long way compared to what they were. Discipline Priest as well, but unfortunately the Holy Priest of 10.2 is effectively the same as the Holy Priest of Season 1. You still go into a key and you really just spam flash heal 300 times, and you use your holy words in emergency situations, or when someone's really dying, or when you can get good value out of them, or whatever, and you go back to spamming flash heal afterwards. You press Prayer Mending on cooldown, maybe you throw out some renews here and there, but really the playstyle hasn't evolved. And that is what I think the problem of Holy Priest is. It's a playstyle issue. It is the toolkit that hasn't kept up with the arms race of other healers and what they've gained throughout Dragonflight. And no amount of 3% or above here or 5% there is going to change that in my estimation. They need ways of healing without being rooted in place, spamming flash heal. They need a toolkit that is powerful enough and varied enough such that they aren't pressing flash heal as a response to every type of damage pattern. Whether it's tank healing or debuff healing, spot healing, AoE healing, rot healing, doesn't matter. Every type of healing pattern in Mythic Plus for Holy Priest is all handled the exact same way. You just press POM on cooldown, you spam flash heal, and you use your holy words when they're up or when you can get good value out of them. That's it. The spec needs a bit more depth, it needs a bit more numerical power, and it needs a toolkit that does a better job of handling all the different situations that healers now face in Mythic Plus. They need the development that the other specs have gotten. If you've made it this far, algorithm stuff, and thanks for watching.